The roar of artillery had barely faded when Sergeant Jack Reynolds felt the world tilt beneath him. One moment, he was crouched behind a shattered wall in a snow-laden European village, the next, a blinding flash and the shouts of enemy soldiers surrounded him. Hands in the air, he was pushed forward, the chill biting through his tattered uniform, his breath clouding in the icy air. In that instant, Jack understood the stark reality that thousands of American soldiers would face during World War II. Capture meant a new kind of battle, one fought not with guns and grenades but with patience, courage, and the will to survive. The train ride that followed was a blur of fatigue and fear. Packed into crowded freight cars with barely enough room to sit, Jack listened to the murmurs of men around him. Some whispered prayers, some muttered curses, and others stared silently at the walls, lost in memories of home. Each man clutched onto fragments of their old lives, holding tight to letters, photographs, or the faint hope that this nightmare would end. For Jack, the world outside had shifted into monochrome. Hope felt fragile, like frost on the edge of a winter window pane, easily shattered by the harsh realities ahead. Upon arrival at the camp, the starkness of confinement struck immediately. Barbed wire fences stretched endlessly, guards patrolled the perimeter with an unyielding gaze, and the barracks themselves were cold, overcrowded, and reeking of damp straw and human fatigue. The prisoners were sorted, counted, and thrust into a daily routine that emphasized obedience above all else. The first nights were the hardest. Jack lay on a wooden bunk, the thin blanket barely keeping the chill at bay, listening to the coughing of sick men and the low moans of those already weakened by starvation and exhaustion. It was a world where fear and despair could take root in moments of silence, where the mind battled as fiercely as the body. Despite the harsh conditions, American soldiers found ways to preserve a semblance of dignity. Jack observed men carving small figures from scraps of wood, others writing letters they knew would never reach home, and some creating games to pass the time. Each act, no matter how small, was a defiance against the crushing monotony and helplessness. These acts of resilience became lifelines, tiny beacons of humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Jack himself began keeping a journal, scrawling down the events of the day, his thoughts wandering to family dinners, baseball games, and quiet evenings back in the United States. The pen became a weapon, a tool to maintain identity when the body and spirit were under siege. Food, or the lack of it, was a constant adversary. Meals were meager, often a thin soup and a small piece of bread, barely enough to fuel the body for the grueling labor that many camps demanded. In the Pacific Theater, conditions were even harsher. Soldiers captured by Japanese forces endured long marches under scorching sun, malnutrition, and the cruelty of guards. Jack's friend, Corporal Harris, recounted the horrors of the Bataan Death March, how men collapsed by the roadside, how thirst and hunger gnawed relentlessly at every soul, and how the weak were abandoned without a second thought. Survival in such circumstances required more than physical endurance, it demanded cunning, solidarity, and an unyielding will to live. Amid these hardships, prisoners developed intricate systems of communication. Notes were passed covertly, messages hidden in laundry, and conversations held in code. Rumors of escape attempts, both successful and failed, circulated like sparks of fire, igniting hope and a sense of purpose. One story that traveled quickly through the camp was the audacious Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3. Hundreds of Allied airmen had spent months digging tunnels beneath the camp, fashioning civilian clothes from scraps, and forging documents. The ingenuity and bravery of these men inspired others, including Jack, who began planning small ways to reclaim a sense of control over his own life, even if the possibility of escape seemed distant. Camaraderie became the bedrock of survival. Men shared what little food they had, tended to the sick, and protected one another from the harshest punishments of the guards. Friendships forged in captivity were intense, bound by the shared struggle to endure. Jack found himself relying on men he had only known for days, discovering the power of collective resilience. They celebrated small victories: a day without punishment, a hot meal, or a letter smuggled through the camp's channels as if they were monumental triumphs. Each act of solidarity reminded Jack that, even in captivity, humanity could endure. The psychological toll was immense. Many soldiers wrestled with despair, nightmares, and the creeping sense of hopelessness. To combat this, they created routines, memorized prayers, and found solace in stories of home. Jack would spend hours imagining walking through his hometown, feeling the warmth of his mother's kitchen or the laughter of his younger siblings. These mental escapes were just as vital as any physical attempt to regain freedom. The mind, after all, could be a sanctuary even when the body was imprisoned. As the weeks turned into months, Jack began to adapt. He learned to read the guards' patterns, to ration food cleverly, and to offer quiet assistance to fellow prisoners without attracting attention. Survival was no longer just about enduring, it was about mastering the small strategies that could keep him alive until liberation came. Each day was a delicate balance between caution and courage, despair and hope, confinement and imagination. Through it all, the memory of home, the stories of escape, and the bonds with fellow soldiers became lifelines that carried Jack through the darkest nights. He understood, as did every POW, that freedom was not just the absence of captivity, it was the preservation of spirit, the refusal to surrender hope, and the unbreakable determination to endure. The walls of the camp might be high, and the barbed wire might seem unyielding, but within those fences lived men whose courage could never be confined. Jack Reynolds' journey had only just begun. The weeks, months, and years ahead would test every fiber of his being, but he had learned the first lesson of captivity: survival was not just a matter of the body, but a triumph of spirit. Every glance at a friend, every shared scrap of bread, every secret note passed in silence was a victory. In the silent resilience of these men, the world would see the extraordinary power of ordinary soldiers, a story of courage that would echo far beyond the barbed wire fences and stone walls of their prison camps. Survival against the odds. The morning fog hung low over the camp, clinging to the barbed wire like a warning. Jack woke to the sound of boots on gravel, the sharp voice of a guard slicing through the cold air. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but it was the uncertainty of the day ahead that weighed heaviest. Every POW knew that survival was not merely about food or warmth, it was about finding strength in a place designed to crush it, about turning despair into a quiet defiance that would carry you through another day. The barracks were a chorus of whispers and coughs, men shifting on wooden bunks that offered little comfort. Outside, frost coated the ground, making each step a reminder of how vulnerable they were. Jack had learned to stretch each morsel of bread, to save a piece of thin soup for later, to ration water carefully. Every small decision mattered. Survival was a science of observation, patience, and cunning. Even a single misstep could invite punishment, yet every day also offered a chance to outsmart the rules, to find small freedoms within the walls that seemed so absolute. In Europe, POWs devised intricate systems to secure necessities. Some men learned to trade favors or smuggle extra rations, while others created contraptions to capture rainwater or collect edible weeds from the surrounding fields. Jack discovered that resourcefulness often meant the difference between a day spent aching from hunger and one where he felt, however briefly, nourished. The ingenuity of the men around him amazed him. Despite exhaustion, fear, and harsh conditions, they found ways to persevere. Each act of self-sufficiency was a silent rebellion against the confines of the camp. The physical demands were relentless. Prisoners were sent to labor under guards' watchful eyes, carrying heavy loads, digging trenches, or performing menial tasks that required endurance and strength. Fatigue was constant, but it was not just the body under strain. Mental fortitude became equally essential. Jack noticed that the men who survived best were those who maintained focus, who could compartmentalize fear and fatigue, and who could find moments of levity even in grim circumstances. Humor, oddly enough, became a weapon. A shared joke, a whispered anecdote from home, could lift spirits and restore energy that food and rest could not. In the Pacific, the struggle was even more extreme. The tropical heat, relentless sun, and unending humidity sapped strength and morale. Soldiers captured after battles in the Philippines or on Pacific Islands faced disease, insect infestations, and an unfamiliar terrain that offered no comfort. Jack had heard stories of men improvising mosquito nets from scraps of cloth, boiling rainwater to avoid illness, and sharing medicinal herbs found in the jungle. Adaptation was survival. Where the environment itself was an adversary, creativity and resilience became as vital as courage. But survival was not only about navigating the environment, it was also about maintaining the mind. Jack kept a mental map of routines: when to sleep, when to speak, when to conserve energy. He learned to anticipate guards' patrols, to memorize the shifts of daylight, and to keep track of small details that might otherwise go unnoticed. The mind, he realized, could be trained for endurance just as the body could. Stories of previous prisoners, whispered legends of escapes and clever subversions, fueled the imagination. Men rehearsed escape plans in their minds, meticulously planning routes, timing, and contingencies, even when the physical opportunity was impossible. Camaraderie continued to serve as a lifeline. Men watched over one another, sharing blankets on freezing nights, dividing meals, or helping the sick walk to the infirmary. Jack formed bonds with men whose courage inspired him daily. They became partners in survival, each act of solidarity a defiance of despair. Through these connections, POWs built a fragile but essential sense of family. In a world stripped of comfort and security, human connection became nourishment. The psychological challenges, however, were relentless. Nightmares stalked sleep, and long hours of confinement offered plenty of time for the mind to wander toward fear and doubt. To counter this, prisoners devised mental exercises. Jack recited poetry from memory, rehearsed baseball plays in his mind, and visualized returning home. These mental escapes were not distractions, they were essential strategies, keeping men tethered to hope and preventing surrender to despair. Every memory of freedom, every recollection of home, acted as a spark that refused to be extinguished by captivity. Small victories defined each day. Securing an extra spoonful of soup, successfully sneaking a letter, or quietly cheering a comrade's clever maneuver against the guards were celebrated quietly but wholeheartedly. These moments reinforced the truth that, even in confinement, agency could exist. Survival was about finding these moments and magnifying them, using them to fuel the next day's endurance. Jack learned to recognize the importance of perspective: the smallest success could ignite the strongest hope. As weeks turned into months, survival became a rhythm, a delicate dance between patience, strategy, and courage. Men like Jack discovered that the human body could endure almost anything if the mind refused to yield. They became masters of observation, careful in every action, creative in every decision, resilient in every setback. The camps, designed to break men, instead became arenas where the most determined could test the limits of their endurance, and where ingenuity often outweighed brute force. Jack understood that survival was not merely about making it through another day, it was about maintaining identity, morality, and hope. Every choice, every act of kindness, every mental exercise was a brick in a foundation that ensured the human spirit remained intact. In the silent, frost-laden mornings and the sweltering, mosquito-ridden afternoons, he and his fellow POWs carved out spaces where life, in some small way, could flourish. They endured not because they had no fear, but because they refused to let fear define them. By the time Jack's hair had grown longer, his body leaner, and his uniform even more tattered, he had become an expert at survival. Not just in the physical sense, but in the subtle art of preserving humanity under extreme duress. He had learned that endurance required creativity, that hope could be cultivated, and that the bonds forged in adversity could be as vital as food, water, or shelter. Each day was a testament to resilience, a quiet triumph over the circumstances designed to crush them. In the world of captivity, survival was not merely a passive act. It was an ongoing performance of courage, resourcefulness, and determination. Jack Reynolds, like countless American POWs across Europe and the Pacific, had discovered that the limits of human endurance were not fixed. They were defined by imagination, solidarity, and an unwavering commitment to live, to resist, and to endure against all odds. Courage and escape. The moon hung low over the camp, a pale witness to the restless shadows moving beneath it. Jack Reynolds crouched behind the cold stone wall, listening intently to the rhythmic crunch of gravel under guard boots. Every heartbeat felt amplified in the silent night. Escape was no longer a distant dream, it had become a calculated gamble, a test of ingenuity and courage. Months of observation, whispered plans, and shared glances had led to this moment, and one misstep could undo everything. Yet, the possibility of freedom pulsed like electricity through the prisoner's veins, a beacon brighter than any light within the barbed wire perimeter. For weeks, the men had prepared. In the European camps, tunnels had been dug painstakingly beneath the barracks, each shovel full of earth removed with precision to avoid detection. Jack marveled at the ingenuity of his comrades, worn bedboards transformed into tools, discarded tins into containers for secret notes, and even soap bars carved into intricate compasses. Every resource was repurposed, every skill leveraged. Escape demanded more than courage, it required patience, meticulous planning, and an unwavering belief that liberty was within reach. In the Pacific Theater, the methods were different but no less daring. Captured soldiers faced the harsh tropical jungles, where every step outside the camp was fraught with danger. Jack had listened to stories of men sneaking past sentries in the dead of night, navigating swamps and rivers, evading patrols while carrying little more than courage and hope. The heat, the insects, and the unforgiving terrain were silent adversaries, testing their endurance with every step. But for those who risked it, each obstacle overcome was a reaffirmation that the human spirit could triumph over even the most extreme circumstances. Jack remembered the night he first participated in a small-scale escape attempt. A few men, including himself, had planned to slip out through a forgotten drainage tunnel, emerging on the outskirts of the camp under the cover of darkness. The tension was suffocating, every creak of a board or whistle of the wind felt like an alarm. Their hands shook, their breaths came in shallow bursts, yet the resolve in their eyes was unshakable. Step by step, inch by inch, they moved through the tunnel, aware that freedom lay just beyond the final exit but that detection would mean immediate and severe consequences. The mental preparation for escape was as rigorous as the physical. Every prisoner rehearsed their route in their mind, memorized guard routines, and planned contingencies. Jack spent hours envisioning what he would do once beyond the camp, mapping forests, rivers, and towns he might encounter. The imagination became a rehearsal space, a laboratory where failures could be studied and avoided before risking real exposure. In many ways, the mind became the most critical tool for survival, sharper than any weapon, steadier than any muscle. Courage among POWs was not only about individual daring, it was about teamwork. Each escape attempt relied on cooperation, trust, and the coordination of many hands. A misstep by one could doom all, and yet each man had to balance initiative with discipline. Jack saw men quietly encouraging one another, passing along tools, holding the line against panic, and offering whispered reassurance when fear threatened to take hold. Solidarity became the invisible backbone of every attempt, a force stronger than any fence or wall. The stories of legendary escapes circulated constantly, fueling determination. The audacity of the Great Escape haunted and inspired the camp alike. Prisoners had built tunnels stretching hundreds of feet, forging civilian clothes and fake documents, all while avoiding the relentless scrutiny of the guards. News of such feats reminded Jack and his fellow soldiers that ingenuity and courage could defy even the most oppressive circumstances. Every new escape plan was born from a mixture of inspiration, observation, and a refusal to accept captivity as permanent. Even minor acts of subversion counted. Smuggling a piece of food, swapping clothes to confuse guards, or leaving misleading tracks were as important as the tunnels themselves. Jack had learned to see opportunities in every small opening, a moment when a guard turned away, a loose fence post, a forgotten gate, and use them to the prisoner's advantage. Survival and escape were inseparable, each required constant awareness, creativity, and audacity. Not every attempt succeeded, but each failure became a lesson. The POWs analyzed every mistake, adjusted strategies, and tried again. Jack watched men recover from setbacks with remarkable resilience, understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Even when a tunnel collapsed or a patrol caught a comrade, the drive to regain freedom persisted. Every setback was temporary, every plan was a step closer to eventual success. The physical toll of escape attempts was severe. Crawling through muddy tunnels, navigating treacherous terrain, and enduring hunger and exposure demanded extraordinary stamina. Jack's body ached constantly, yet adrenaline and determination carried him forward. Each obstacle overcome reinforced a sense of agency that captivity had long denied. Freedom, even in its most tentative form, justified every hardship endured. What struck Jack most profoundly was the psychological impact of escape. The very act of trying, even if unsuccessful, restored a sense of control. In a world designed to render them powerless, each plan, each coordinated movement, each silent nod of understanding, reminded POWs that they were more than prisoners, they were strategists, thinkers, and survivors. The mind became a weapon, and hope its most potent ammunition. When liberation finally arrived, it was often abrupt, yet the months of preparation and daring attempts shaped every POW's response. Men who had risked everything in nightly escapades emerged with a profound sense of resilience. Jack remembered the first moment he stepped beyond the camp under the cover of night, heart hammering, breath ragged, and realizing that fear had not broken him. In those steps, he felt the immense power of courage, ingenuity, and the human will to reclaim freedom. Even in the darkest days, the stories of escape, successful or not, remained the soul of captivity. They reminded Jack that confinement could challenge the body, but courage could liberate the spirit. The barbed wire fences, watchful guards, and punishing conditions could never contain imagination, determination, or the yearning for life beyond the walls. Escape was not just a physical act, it was the embodiment of hope, the ultimate declaration that no matter how harsh the circumstances, the human spirit could never be fully restrained. For Jack Reynolds, every calculated risk, every midnight whisper of a plan, and every shared glance of solidarity reinforced a single truth: courage was contagious, ingenuity was essential, and freedom, however elusive, was always worth the gamble. In the quiet darkness of the camps, amidst the fear and uncertainty, the men discovered that to attempt escape was to claim agency over their own lives, a defiance that would echo far beyond the barbed wire into history itself. Liberation and life after captivity. The first light of dawn spilled across the camp, casting long shadows over the broken fences and empty watchtowers. Silence hung in the air, heavier than the months of fear, yet charged with anticipation. Jack Reynolds could hardly believe it. The war was ending, and liberation had come. After months, sometimes years, of confinement, the gates were finally open. The moment carried an intensity that no description could capture: relief, disbelief, joy, and exhaustion all intertwined into a single, overwhelming sensation. For many prisoners, freedom was a sudden shock. The physical world beyond the camp, the open sky, fresh air, the absence of constant surveillance, felt almost alien. Jack inhaled deeply, savoring the sensation of wind on his face, of grass under his boots, and of unshackled movement. Yet, liberation brought its own challenges. After so long under strict routines and harsh conditions, the simplest tasks, walking without caution, eating freely, even deciding where to go, required adjustment. POWs had survived extreme adversity, but re-entering normal life demanded a different kind of resilience. Europe's winter liberation presented both joy and uncertainty. Allied forces moved through the countryside, offering food, medical aid, and transport, but the ruins of towns and villages reminded returning soldiers of the cost of war. Jack witnessed landscapes scarred by bombings, empty homes, and communities attempting to piece themselves back together. Even amidst celebration, there was mourning. Friends lost, lives altered irrevocably, and the knowledge that the world had changed forever tempered the initial relief. Liberation was not only a physical act, it was the beginning of a long, complex journey back to life. In the Pacific, liberation often came after months of grueling conditions, starvation, and disease. Soldiers rescued from islands or camps faced the daunting task of regaining strength and health. Jack had heard of men so weakened by malnutrition that every step required effort, yet the human spirit shone as brightly as ever. The bonds formed during captivity, shared hardship, mutual support, and relentless perseverance provided the foundation for recovery. POWs discovered that their resilience, honed through deprivation and fear, became an invaluable resource as they confronted the uncertainties of freedom. Reintegration into society posed its own obstacles. Many soldiers returned to homes that had changed or were unrecognizable after the war. Families were anxious, cities had been altered, and communities had been reshaped by the global conflict. Jack and his fellow veterans needed time to reconnect, to adjust to civilian life, and to navigate the emotional landscape shaped by trauma. Memories of confinement and the daily struggle for survival lingered, influencing behavior, relationships, and perspectives. While physical wounds healed, the mental and emotional scars required patience, reflection, and support. Education and career opportunities became critical tools for rebuilding life. Programs like the GI Bill in the United States provided veterans with access to schools, vocational training, and low-interest home loans. Jack, like many others, seized these opportunities to transform uncertainty into stability. The chance to learn, to earn, and to reintegrate into society was a lifeline, a structured path that allowed returning soldiers to rebuild, to dream, and to regain control over their futures. Education became more than a personal goal, it was a bridge from survival to self-determination. Yet, liberation was not solely about practical recovery. It carried a profound emotional dimension. POWs celebrated not just freedom from confinement, but also the resilience that had carried them through. Jack thought of every small victory, every silent act of courage, every bond formed in adversity. Each of these moments now felt monumental. The trials of captivity had reshaped him, instilling perspective, humility, and an understanding of the limits and the strength of the human spirit. Men who had endured together often maintained lifelong connections, a testament to the bonds forged under extreme conditions. Stories of liberation spread quickly, inspiring communities and reminding the world of human endurance. Newspapers reported POW returns with headlines that highlighted both heroism and tragedy. Families, towns, and nations collectively exhaled as soldiers stepped onto trains, buses, and ships bound for home. Jack's journey mirrored millions of others, a mix of relief, reflection, and the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming life. For veterans, every day became an opportunity to honor the past while building a future defined by choice rather than circumstance. The psychological journey was ongoing. Flashbacks, nightmares, and lingering fears were common, yet many veterans found solace in service organizations, therapy, and peer support. Jack discovered that sharing experiences helped, transforming trauma into understanding, isolation into community. Together, former POWs rebuilt their identities, balancing memories of hardship with the possibilities of a life restored. The process was neither linear nor easy, but it was achievable, and it reflected the enduring power of courage, resilience, and hope. As Jack settled into post-war life, he reflected on the lessons captivity had taught him. Patience, resourcefulness, and determination were tools that extended beyond survival. They became principles for living. Every challenge thereafter, from professional setbacks to personal trials, was approached with the perspective of someone who had faced the edge and returned. Freedom had been won not just with the arrival of Allied forces, but with the unyielding spirit that refused to surrender in the darkest hours. In the end, liberation was more than an exit from confinement, it was a reclaiming of humanity. Jack and his fellow POWs had endured deprivation, fear, and uncertainty, but they had also cultivated courage, ingenuity, and solidarity. The experience shaped them forever, embedding lessons of perseverance and hope that extended far beyond the camp's boundaries. Life after captivity was not merely a return to normalcy, it was a testament to the extraordinary strength of ordinary men, a narrative of survival transformed into legacy. As the sun rose fully, casting warmth over the camp for the first time in years, Jack stepped forward with quiet resolve. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a reminder that life, even after unimaginable hardship, could be reclaimed. Liberation was the culmination of endurance, the reward for courage, and the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by the chains of captivity, but by the limitless potential of freedom, hope, and human resilience.